Hey, this is a short last minute video from the week 3. So the last video I covered all the user interface elements. And I actually forgot to talk about the drawing canvas, or if you wish to have some type of image behind everything. Um, so anyway, I talked for an hour on like the user interface, and then I went home and I realized that this little canvas was never talked about because I hid it. So if you wish to have some type of image, for me, I'm just there's actually just a canvas, but you may want to have some type of image behind here. So let me show you how to create a polygon, a primitive, and then how to put a texture on a material, and how to put that material on it, and then how to position it in your game world. So if you do wish to have something behind you to draw on, we can do that. So let me start from scratch. So game object, 3D, and a quad is going to work best for this. I'm going to press the F key. I'm going to go hide my drawing canvas. So remember that when you create something, it gives you these random numbers in the position to make sure they're not these whatever you're spawning doesn't sit on top of each other. So just click reset position, and what happens is it puts it in world space 0, 0, 0. So one thing to note with your camera, I noticed some of you are moving it a little bit. Um, Make sure that it's not on the X. Normally it's like 10 units off or something like this on the Z. And if you want, there's a height. This is here by default because that's the average height of like a human, um, like 6 feet or what have you. Um, so it's like 2 units up, and then it looks down a little bit with this little rotation. So if I press the F key and flip around, here's the camera. Here we go. And if you notice that I align it with the way that it's rotated, which is basically like 10 degrees on the X, I can continue rotating on the X. You can see that this is what it's doing. It's like looking up and down. It's just looking down slightly, 10 degrees, because it's like this is where we're creating stuff in the world at 0.000. So the way I currently have my system set up is I'm not looking out at anything like a collider I'm trying to draw onto. It's just wherever my mouse is, it's projecting out into the world in some depth. So, it's arbitrary. It doesn't need, I could zero this all out, just have no rotation. It's just sitting on the ground plane and looking directly at world space 0. And now you'll notice that I'm looking directly at the quad, at this primitive. It's just a plane pointing toward the camera. Quads by default are already oriented up. They're meant to be like pointed at the camera, whereas a game object 3D plane, if you notice, if I zero out its position, it is just pointing like it acts like a ground plane. It's lying down on the horizontal, and so its orientation is up. It's pointing up. So remember when we were creating those mathematical planes and we have to say we had to give that vector up or vector forward, like what is its orientation? So a plane by default is meant to just act like a ground plane. So its orientation is pointing up, vector 3 up. Whereas a quad has a different purpose. It's meant to be pointed toward the camera normally. So its orientation is along the z, our vector 3 dot forward. So we were doing these with those mathematical planes, but you can see that their built-in primitives kind of do something similar. Like the plane is pointing up, the quad is pointing forward. So that's why I'm starting with a quad. If your camera is at some situation, say it's up and it's looking down, I'm just gonna go over here. It's easier for me to move the rotation. Say if it's doing something like this, because this is what makes sense for your game. Instead of using this quad and trying to align it to the camera and what have you, the easiest thing is just drag it under the main camera and zero out its differences. So I'm keeping the difference in the Z because I want it to be out from the camera. If I zeroed out the Z, it would sit right on the camera. You see that? So as I pull it out from the camera, since it's a child of the camera, it's aligned with it. Notice it's not pulling out directly along global Z. It's like pulling out along the direction that the camera is pointing. So if I rotate it, my plane is coming along for the ride. So if I look at it differently, look, the plane is moving with the camera. It stays connected with it. And so no matter where the camera looks, I have this like plane, this little quad that makes sense. That's my background drop. Like this is where I'm painting. If, for example, if the camera's moving, it stays with it. So just to show you that this is why I parented this drawing plane underneath the quad, underneath the camera. So if your camera has some numbers here, it makes sense, whatever, then you might want to do that. For me, I'm actually going to zero it out so that I'll pull the quad out, or canvas. And the only real important thing with the quad is that it's off from the camera and it's farther than where we're drawing from the distance. Okay? So for me, I'm drawing like 10 units. I think I'm drawing like 5 units out from the camera. Distance I'm setting to 5. Yeah. And if I take a look at the click, yeah, I'm drawing 5 units out from the camera. So I just have to make sure that the quad is more than 5. So if you remember, the camera is 10 units, negative 10 units from the center. The quad's at center at 0. So it's 10 units away. If you don't like doing that type of math, that's why it's actually easy to, another benefit anyway, make it a child or making the camera a parent, is that now it's not showing you global numbers. It's showing you local numbers are numbers relative to its parent, to the camera. So if the camera is at world space negative 10 in the Z, and this quad is at world space 0, if I pull it out, notice world space 0, 10 unit difference. If I pull it underneath the camera, notice that it's showing positive 10, or it's positive 10 units away. It's positive because it's this direction. Z positive is in this direction. And so the quad, we can now move it relative to the camera. Notice how the number is updating. So you just make sure it's farther away than wherever your paint strokes are. So if you have like a variable distance paint stroke, this needs to be like super far away. So let's say the farthest that we're going to get away from the camera is 30 units. We're doing this change of distance, right? If that's the case, then I could start scaling this plane up to whatever sizes you wish to fill. Say I want this type of, say I want it like this, but move it down a little bit so it doesn't intersect with my title, or whatever you wish to have it. Say like this is my final result. I'm happy with this. It's far enough away from the camera that I can paint and not paint behind it. So the only thing to note is, right now anyway, is that there is a collider on it. So my script will delete stuff when I left click that has a collider. So I have to be aware of that. So if I left click, it deletes it. So it was deleted in play mode. So as I unclick play, the quad comes back. Remember, whatever we do in play mode is not permanent, it's temporary changes. And for this reason, it actually makes a lot of sense. Because if I delete it in play mode, then I got to rebuild everything, right? So for my purposes, I want to turn the collider off. Just turn it off, or I can just remove it altogether. So that when I click play, now I can paint, I can destroy, or create and erase, or whatever the words are you're using. And I can do it with a canvas background. That's great, and it works, and there's no collider on my background. It's just sitting there, it's pretty. And in this case, there's no, for me, let me just move this a little closer. Because if you get them close enough, you start seeing that there's a shadow. Yep. So the way that the light's being cast, let me turn off time destroy, paint something. The objects are close enough where it's casting a shadow. So remember, we have this light source. We can rotate it if we choose to. You can if you want to. And if I get the rotation correctly, notice, that based on the angle of the light source and where these two objects are sitting will determine how the shadow is casting. So if you want to have a shadow or you want a certain lighting condition, know that you should be changing the light. But let's say we're happy with the light and you are getting shadows and you do not want to shadow. Maybe you do, but if you don't, click on the plane quad, and under its mesh render, we can say whether objects cast and receive shadows. For him, just turn off receive shadows. Now there's no shadows, but these objects are still casting shadows on each other. That's great. And if you wanted to, with your prefabs, you could turn off casting and receiving shadows if you do not want a shaded look, if you want them to look more flat. But I want my objects to look 3D, so I want my objects to keep casting and receiving shadows onto each other. But in this case, I was able to turn off shadows on my plane so that I didn't get this shadow casted. So I'm going to unclick play and everything will pop back to where it was, because let's just say I'm happy with this. Now I can talk about creating a texture in a material. So I already have one, so I'm just going to assign it and then I'll show you how I built it. So if I take this canvas and apply it, this is a material. It looks like this. I can switch up the default object that we're painting onto. Maybe you can see something what it looks like more as like a plane, which is what our representative is going to be like. And this is what the material looks like. Notice that it's these basic materials that I was showing you how to create. We were just messing around with the color channel before, and now I'm mixing color with this actual texture. If you notice here, there's a texture file connected to this channel. So it's not just a color, it's texture information. This texture looks like this. So notice it's a JPEG, it's a flat texture. So let's bring in something new and make another material, and I'll show you how to do this yourself. So if you just do a Google search, in this case, I wanted to look like a canvas. Oh, here it is right here, canvas background. I just searched I said canvas background, went to images. Let's search for something else. So instead of canvas, let's say we want to paint on metal, and I'll say metal texture. Let's type that in. Go to images, and we have a bunch of metal textures. That's great. This one looks good. This silver metal. It's not too confusing. It's not too variant. I think it'll work as a background. So, I can either right click and save image here, or you can actually go to its destination, save it. But at either case, you want to save image. So we did a Google image search, found images we want, and we download them. So where do we download them to? Well, if you know where your project is, in this case, I'm navigated straight to it. Or you can, download to your downloads folder and just drag and drop them into Unity. But in this case, I happen to be right where my project is, so I'm just going to go, and I created a folder called textures. So to do that, assets, right click, create folder. Notice I have a folder for my materials and my folder for textures, so they are separate. So under textures here, this is the name of this silver material. It's a little messy. I'm going to get rid of that. Silver metal texture background. Great. Actually, that's a very descriptive name. I'm going to save that. Go back to Unity. It's going to compile, and notice here I have my silver in my canvas. I have a different texture. This is a JPEG. It's an external file. You can right click, show and explore. Here it is. Here's one texture file with its corresponding meta, one texture file corresponding meta. Great. Our texture is in our project. Let's go to the materials folder. Let's create a material, and I'm going to call it metal. Something descriptive, I know what it's supposed to be. Now, I want to connect a texture here. So there's a few ways to do this. If you click on textures, here's the texture, but the problem is if you click on it, the inspector is going to update like that. So just be wary that you can navigate to another folder, but click and drag. Don't click, because if you click, it's going to switch out the inspector. Click and drag, and we're going to update our texture on our material, and then I can apply that to this object. So let me, while I'm still here, let me disconnect that. Notice I click, this is going to be important. This button here, let me shrink it down. It's almost like an asset navigator. It shows you which assets actually can connect to that channel, to this image channel. So it shows you only images in your project. I have a few. Notice I can swap out different ones. And if I move this over, this is what it's going to look like on the object. This is a screenshot that I use in itch.io, but since a screenshot is a JPEG, you can connect it. So let me undo that, say none. I don't want to select a texture, select none. Notice it empties out the albedo channel, it's empty. And let me connect the metal material here, and hopefully this will make more sense. So say if I shrink this down a little bit, say if I connect my screenshot or my metal, which is ultimately what we're going to get to, or other stuff, say canvas or just some other default images that are in there. This is what it looks like. But notice I'm switching the texture channel of my material, and the material just happens to be connected to my primitive already, so I'm seeing the results instantly. So I'll click none. So now I can show you that this little icon, you can select materials, and if there's too many, you can select the texture, and if there's too many, you can do a search for it. Say, no, I just want to see metal. And I'll just show you whatever has metal in the name. So, real quickly, I want to show you that you can lock this little lock right here, lock the inspector, saying, I just want to look at this material no matter what I click on. No matter where I am, what I'm clicking on in the project view, it's not switching out my inspector, no matter what I click on. So I can hunt around, find whatever it is, be like, here's that texture I was trying to find. I don't have to worry about the inspector switching away. Update the material. And when you're done, though, make sure you unlock. Otherwise, you're going to be locked on that, and you're going to be clicking around later on. You're like, why is my inspector not updating? Well, it's because you have it locked. All right. So we're back to our object, our quad, and then you can scale it as you wish. Now the texture is kind of stretched a little bit because the texture shape is different than the object shape. We're not going to get into that deeply. Just know that if it's stretching too much or what have you, you can tile it like so if you don't like the results you're getting. In either case, I'll leave tiling back to 1 by 1, and you can kind of morph your background as you see fit. So I'll make it more square-like, which is what the texture's like. But as you find different textures, some of them will be different aspect ratios, and we'll save that conversation for later. End of the day, I found a texture online. I saved it into my project. I created a material. I named it something that's relevant. I connected the texture to the albedo. Albedo means like the color information, the diffuse information. What is the color information? This object, there's other channels. We're not getting into more in-depth looking objects. So the only thing I click on it, or I could actually just click on the material. In either case, I'm trying to get back to the material. So I could come down here to the material. Just know that you can get quickly some little different lighting variants if this is like how metallic or how smooth the object is. So if you did want to change up how your material looked quickly, you could mess with these sliders if they're not exactly the results you want, or if you want to try something a little bit different. Also, you can add a coloring overlay over your texture. So even though my metal still looks like a metal, that's the base texturing information, you can do some coloring on top of it. So here maybe I'll tint it a little green, a little aged copper, it's green copper that's been aged like the Statue of Liberty or what have you. So these are some ways you can still get more customization, more options besides just grabbing a texture online. At the end of the day, now I have a canvas. I can paint on it, and I can delete stuff, and I'm not deleting the canvas. There's no collider on it, no anything. It's just an image that is behind where I'm painting, which is a huge idea to understand. Here's the camera. Here's my background, and my painted objects are appearing in between the two. They are rendered to the camera, and they are not being rendered behind. So if I move this background, if I turned off time to destroy and move this close enough, we just see the background. We don't see the object. All right. So that's it for creating your own background.